So good morning, everybody. I'm Helen Buckingham. I'm the Director of Strategy at the Nuffield Trust, but for today's purposes, most importantly, I'm the Chair of National Voices. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this final session of our conference on inequity in health. It's been an amazing few weeks. We've had some really thought-provoking sessions, some excellent speakers talking to us about how inequalities manifest in a wide range of ways. We've been thinking about poverty, we've been thinking about racial inequalities, and we've been thinking about digital exclusion and inclusion. We've had literally hundreds of members and other friends and colleagues joining us for the conversations. And this morning, we're bringing it all together. We've got some reflections from experts by experience. We've got reflections from people who work in the voluntary sector and from people in the statutory sector in NHS England. And they're going to help us think about what we can do in partnership to address the issues that we've been discussing over the last few weeks. Kind of a quick reminder about the technology. If we can have the next slide, Laura. We have got live captions available, so you should find a closed captions, a CC button at the bottom of your screen, or you can click on the link in the chat, and you can also adjust the colour and the font via that link as well. Please do use the chat to introduce yourselves and to generally to engage in the discussion. We've had some really, really rich conversations, I think, going on in the chat over the last few weeks, and we will keep them. We will review what's being said there. But we've also got a panel session later this morning, and you can use the Q&A box to post questions to the panel that we'll come to later on. Everything that we do as an organisation, as National Voices, is about amplifying the voices of people who use services, so that we can build on their experiences to create better services. And so I'm delighted, therefore, to introduce our first speaker this morning. Marsha McAdam, who's an expert by experience, is going to give us her view on health inequities and what she's heard from the conference over the last few weeks and what it's meant for her. So Marsha, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry. There was always a first one. My name's Marsha McAdam. I have borderline personality disorder, recurrent depression, fibromyalgia, type 2 diabetes, and a few other things. When I was asked to listen in on these conversations over the 3 weeks, at times, the language was hard to sort of understand, especially in the first week when they were talking about poverty. And then the wording of inequity and inequality came up. And I finally got it last night when I was listening back to it for the second time. But one thing that I'd like you to sort of really think about going forward is, if we need to change things, everyone needs to understand them. And so there's that. The first speaker at the beginning was Sandra, and she was saying, you know, it's only in the last few years when she's doing her patient involvement work that she's now understanding that. So yeah, that's something that I'd ask you to be mindful of. And then Sanisha was talking about, she was doing on the race inequality workshops, and I'm lucky enough to know Sanisha. She's a fellow mental health campaigner, and she was talking about what it's like to be a Black bisexual woman who has borderline personality disorder. And she was also mentioning about the Black women being sorry about this if I get this wrong, they're 5 times higher to die in pregnancy than a white woman. And then I think it was then discussed a bit later that Asian women were 2%, you know, so those are really, really worrying facts and figures. And if I'm waffling, hopefully it'll make sense in a bit, so please bear with me. A few years ago, I facilitated some workshops here in Greater Manchester for the Centre for Mental Health. And it was for their Commission for Inequality to Mental Health. And these workshops were just before COVID, and the intelligence that they gathered really helped to inform them in some of the work that they were doing. So I know that someone's going to post a link to that paper. Some of the things that, for me, hearing about some of that is, what can I as a person do to sort of try and make things a bit easier, or just stand alongside people. On the on the last day, it was of this these workshops, it was on digital exclusivity. As I mentioned before, I have fibromyalgia, I have chronic fatigue and that. And Savannah on this call, she's actually really saved me a few times that I really panic just before going on to a meeting and that, struggling to find the login. Plus, things take me a lot longer to digest because, you know, just trying to keep on top of all the tech, even basic Word documents and that. So I guess digital progression in that is really amazing, but we need to sort of, you know, definitely, you know, it not just be one size fits all, and that there be support there, like the Savannahs who can like save me at the last minute. And, you know, so I think that this conference has been amazing. And the fact that we're wanting to do something about it, and the message has been, I feel throughout it, right, enough's enough, we're going to do something. And so it's been a bit of a pleasure to listen in on all this. I guess now we need to move to that next stage. We've had so much data that's been collected over the years and that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that I am one of those, every time I go to events, I'm one of those statistics on the screen who is, I have complex morbidities, I have borderline personality disorder, I'm disabled. And so some of the things for me is, I joke that I go around things on my mobility scooter. And it's in the last few years that I've developed some confidence. And it's because I've had some mentoring from some key figures across the country, like Sarah Hughes from the Centre for Mental Health, Professor Peter Fonagy from the Anna Freud Centre, who also create the therapy that completely transformed my life called mentalization-based therapy. Now, in the reason I'm mentioning these people in the workshops for like in this was, in one of the workshops, it was mentioned strongly about stigma. And so there's so many different ways that people can be stigmatized. And it's not just for someone's mental illness. It could be because they're disabled, or as someone was saying in one of the first workshops, it's in some cultures, having debt is unheard of and it's so shameful. The reason that I mentioned, as I said, the stigma is because later on this year, myself, Sarah Hughes, and Professor Peter Fonagy are going to be doing a campaign around borderline personality disorder and the stigma that comes along to it. So I asked if I could mention it here. I asked from Helen and Charlotte. So I really believe in what you're trying to do, and I'm one of those statistics. So please, please carry on doing what you're doing, and let's get other people like me involved who, if it wasn't, so I mentioned about digital and exclusion. So if it wasn't for digital during this COVID period, I would have been very, very ill and probably would have ended up in hospital due to my mental ill health. So there's also the good thing of, yes, it's keeping me engaged, but on the other hand, it also makes me antisocial afterwards and don't get time to speak to our friends. Yeah, I hope it makes sense. And I'm sorry if I waffle, but I just always try and speak from the heart. So yeah.
Thank you, Marsha. That's fantastic to hear. Now we should be moving on, I think, to Charlotte now. I'm trying to see Charlotte on the screen.
I think potentially Charlotte's dropped out. I can't see her anywhere.
Right.
Do we have Charlotte? I don't think we have Charlotte. In which case, I'll share Charlotte's slides now, and we'll see if we can get Charlotte on.
Oh, she says she's here in the chat. So apologies, everybody. Technology is marvelous for doing these things and making sure we can include lots of people, but occasionally it gives us some challenges. So, Charlotte, can we hear you?
Laura, should we share?
Here. Charlotte's here.
Oh, I'm here. Sorry, I just couldn't speak.
Welcome back.
For some reason, there we are. Super. Thank you so much, Marsha. I know you did not waffle at all, and it was very clear that you spoke from the heart. And the thing that really resonates with me very strongly is that you said you're one of those statistics. And to one extent, so to some extent, we're all part of those statistics. You know, we've all hopefully last weekend filled in the census, and that's how we enter all these statistics. But I very much hear from what you were saying that some of us are at the sharp end of these inequalities that we talk about on this very abstract level. And I think it's such a good reminder to really sit with the fact that we're talking about people and their individual stories and hopes and aspirations, and also really to challenge ourselves to foreground that in the work that we're about to embark on, and to work with people like you and all the brilliant people you brought to this conference. So thank you for that, Marsha. I'm going to also do what Marsha's done. We're in a reflective mode right now, and then we move into action mode. But I think it would be useful if I briefly recap what I think we've learned over the last 3 full days of conference. I'll keep it very brief, and I'll miss a lot of the stuff that has happened. You know, we had a panel session every morning with eminent experts, very lively discussions, and then every afternoon we had 2 sessions that were led by members and people they've partnered up with. And I was so impressed with the partnerships we've heard about and the real life learning. So I won't be able to do justice to all of that. I'll literally just take one thing from every day and hope to wrap it into a story going forward. Laura, if you go to the next slide, and I'll move on to day 1. Day 1, and I think this is also featured in what Marsha just said, we talked a bit about language, and I'm not sure we've really cracked that. I'm looking forward to hearing from Daisy in a minute, who's one of our panelists today from Joseph Rowntree, and they've done some serious thinking around language and how we need to frame our conversations. And Sandra told us on the day that this language is a bit exclusive, and it's hard to relate to. And if we, as people who really desperately care about these issues, find this language difficult to relate to, then we're not doing a great job, I don't think. So one of the things I'm taking away from that day is that we need to challenge ourselves more to talk about this in a way that makes sense to people. One of the things we heard from Joe's work, Joe Bibby, on the first day, was that if you say to people, are you aware that things are quite unjust in society. People become a bit fatalistic because they sort of say, well, it's always been that way. You know, for the last 60,000 years of human history, things have been unjust. So she was suggesting we should use language of fairness. And we are wondering about that ourselves, because fairness moves people's brains into maybe a slightly more pragmatic space where you think, well, I'm sure we can do something about unfairness. So we are kind of grappling with that. The other thing that I felt very strongly on day one was that we had the experts talking about the need to go upstream, to talk about the things that actually create ill health or health, rather than talking about health services. And then we had people with lived experience and our members and other charities talking passionately about the need for better access to services, and also about the stigma of people needing services and so on. And I kind of felt we can't just keep saying to the pragmatists in the room, to the people who want to deal with the individual in front of them, that they're picking up the wrong end of the stick, and that they should not talk about the individual in front of them. They should talk about poverty, and they should talk about these big machinations of society. I'm just sort of almost thinking now, we need both. We need to talk about the individual in front of us. And sometimes all we can do for that particular individual is argue for better access, is argue about stigma. And we need to talk about the stuff that the experts call upstream. And really strongly also, I learned that these relationships are circular. So if you don't have access, you end up with worse health, you end up with more stigma, you end up with less trust, which means you are less likely again to seek help and so on. So, you know, we are not talking about a river that runs from one end to the other. One is upstream and one is downstream. We're really talking about quite a messy whirlpool of issues where things impact each other. And there's no wrong place to focus. I think that's something I really took away from day one. If we move on to day two and the next slide, that was the one where we focused on racism. And the thing I felt, you know, again, zooming out, there was so much richness there. But the thing that I really felt most strongly almost was a real anxiety that we have been here before, that particularly when it comes to racial injustice, the response from people in power, if that is such a thing, and there clearly is, seems to be to ask for another review. And that is how, frankly, things are being kicked into the long grass. And a real impatience from people affected by inequality, but also from all the rest of us who are desperate to see some change, that we must not let this moment pass again, that there is enough data. We know how people are affected. We need to now do something. And then I was so pleased to listen in on the afternoon workshops and to hear charities large and small grapple with the question of what is it we are going to do? And if we are moving into that real world of real action, then it's very obvious that nothing's ever perfect. None of our members are going to, on their own, reduce all the racism that's out there, you know, and tackle it and lead us into a bright future of racial equality. But we heard from members who are desperately trying to do their bit and who were very honest about where they are on the curve, what they need in order to challenge themselves more. And what I really took away from it is the centrality of partnering up very intelligently at this point. So if you're a health, maybe condition-specific charity, who do you need to partner up with to reach people with your services? And a real desire for the services we as charities provide. And the vast majority of members who are members of National Voices are in the business of providing services, even if they are just information and advice services, you know, not just that are really important services. And what is the role of those services to stand in the way of further stigmatization, further injustice? So a lot there to unpack again. On day three, we talked about digital exclusion and inclusion, and really, again, you know, there was so much richness there, but the thing I'm taking away very strongly is that we can't homogenize communities. We can't just say old people are excluded, disabled people are excluded. We need to unpack that so much more. And that requires us to listen harder and to work with people, to actually place people at the center, their agency, the assets they have, the households they live in, the help they can rely on in order to access care digitally, for example, and the real centrality of having to work with people rather than just for them. So where does that leave us as national voices? Well, we're not going to shut up about this. Too much has happened. So you hear it here first. We are going to try to keep this going. So if we go, yeah, that's the slide I want to talk about now. We are for now trying to, we're still grappling with language, but we are for now have settled on the terminology of Fair Health Coalition. And we would like to invite all of you to join us on this journey and to stay engaged with these topics as they emerge for us as charities in health and care. So we did, when I arrived at National Voices, which is now 2 years ago, we did set up a health inequality network for members inside National Voices, and we met a few times. And one of the things we decided to do together as charities in this space is organize a conference. So we have certainly done that with the help of the Health Foundation and PPL. But clearly there is so much more to do. Now, the way I think we need to do a number of things as charities in this space, mindful of what our assets are and what they are not. We are not the health system. We do not spend £130 billion on the health of the population in the UK. We are very widely diverse organizations who are very close to people and their needs and their ambitions. So most of us provide some services, and I therefore think our services need to feature in the thinking and the doing we are going to embark on. And we need to challenge ourselves much harder maybe than we have done in the past on how can we make sure that these services are fully inclusive and tackle the inverse care law, not just contribute to the inverse care law. The inverse care law, as you might remember, means those people with the most substantial needs are the least likely to be served by existing service models. And sadly, that also applies to the services the voluntary and community sector provides. So there is something about learning together about the services we provide, but we also are, as a group of organizations, quite a formidable campaigning machine. And we think we need to do something in the campaigning space. And as a team in National Voices, we have started thinking about the kind of things we heard over the last month that lend themselves to some campaigning. Might it be stuff around community languages and British Sign Language interpretation? Might it be around free access to data and digital when you need to access NHS services, make all calls free, phone numbers, and so on? We want to stay in that very pragmatic place. We don't think it's going to work for us as charities to say we want a fair and free society. That's not something that is going to lend itself to a very pragmatic campaign. We want to pick those things that we think we can make some progress on. Better statutory sick pay for people so they can afford to stay home if they're unwell, and so on. So we think there's something there on campaigning and something around services, learning from each other, partnering up. What we're going to do now, as well as invite you to sign up and join us, is to ask you what you think we should do by way of priorities. So I think Savannah is going to place a link in the chat where you can see some suggestions for things you think our coalition of health and care charities should get up to. And do please vote on that. Whilst that is going on, I'm going to now move on to my agenda. I'm going to ask Daisy from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to talk about the insight they have generated that will help us, hopefully, to find a better, more impactful way of talking about the issues we all care about. Thank you, and over to you, Daisy.
Thanks, Charlotte. Really, really excited to be here today. I'm campaigns manager. I lead our campaigns work at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And health has long been an issue that we know has a huge interlink with poverty. So really excited to be here today to talk about how we talk about poverty in this space really, really matters. Next slide, please. So just very briefly on JRF. So at JRF, we exist to make change happen, both for and with people experiencing poverty. And one of the main things that we want to achieve is that more people within the public want to solve poverty, understand it, and take action. And that's really based on the idea that to get that long-term political change, you really need that massive public support behind you. So the way we talk about poverty really matters. And we've learned a lot. You know, in the past, we've spent many years talking about poverty using facts and figures. But we've realised that we need to tell a new story about poverty in the UK, because despite our best efforts and years of research, ultimately the overall picture hasn't changed and public attitudes have not been significantly improving. So to address this, we teamed up with the Frameworks Institute, who are a comms-led non-profit organisation based out in the US. And they undertook a huge amount of research, so with over 20,000 members of the public over a number of years, to really understand, firstly, what do the public think about when we say poverty? And what are the ways into the conversation about poverty that dial up perhaps more positive ways and dial down some of those more negative assumptions that are held by the public. So the end result of all that work was a set of tried and tested framing tools. So next slide, please. So the research told us that it's really easy, actually, to trigger unhelpful ways of thinking when we talk about poverty. And it's a trap that we absolutely must avoid falling into. Our research showed that there are three really kind of commonly held beliefs about poverty in the UK. Firstly, post-poverty, this idea that poverty happens somewhere else in another country or in another time. And talking about poverty in that way really invites comparisons and triggers that belief that real poverty isn't here in the UK today. Secondly, self-makingness. So this is the idea that it's essentially it's your fault, that if we only talk about individuals instead of systems, it's really easy to trigger that belief that ultimately people's circumstances are entirely down to those choices. So Charlotte was obviously talking there about the need to find that balance between individual stories and that contextualization of the system that's holding people back. And I think that's a particular one to be careful about, because it's a frame that is very, very strongly triggered in a lot of people. Essentially, it's their fault. It's a way of sort of people protecting themselves from this idea that it could happen to them. And then thirdly, and this is a notion that's perhaps held more by sort of left-wing audiences, this idea that the game is rigged and that nothing will ever change, a sort of fatalism that we will always have poverty and that the game is rigged too strongly against us. If we don't talk about solutions, if we talk about broken systems, that things are broken, then we risk triggering this kind of fatalism, which can switch people off. So how can we avoid or kind of counteract some of these ideas? And what does that mean for how we communicate? Next slide, please. So our research tested some of the key values that are held across our society and across our political parties. So common held values that sit across the public at large, which offer a good way in for our conversations about poverty. And the two that came out most strongly, and as I said, these were held across the public, not just in certain segments, were compassion and justice. These concepts really help people see that poverty matters. They help show us that we have a collective responsibility as a nation to solve poverty. And actually, by using quite strong phrases like "it is not right," a kind of justice-based phrase, rather than "it is not fair," and obviously Charlotte's discussed that. But we would argue that talking about fairness, again, sort of risks talking risks kind of it being triggered that you're sort of talking about an individual. It's not fair on the individual. And actually we need to talk about society, that it's not right in society that we have poverty and we have a collective responsibility to solve it. So by creating this sense that this is all about us, we can move on from that idea that poverty affects them over there. Next slide, please. So the second set of metaphors that came through the research, and just to stress, you know, we tested a huge amount of what different ways of talking about poverty, and these were the ones that came through as the most kind of salient. So the second set were what we call currents. So this is the idea that currents within water kind of represent a force that's pulling you under in a way that you can't control. You know, metaphors paint that really powerful picture, and you know, it's something we actually all do in our language all the time. So evoking powerful metaphors can be a really powerful way of illustrating the effects of poverty that pull us down in ways that we can't control. The next slide, please. So the second set of metaphors that the research proposed was this concept of restricts and restrains. So again, a really strong visualization there of the forces, again, forces that are greater than they can control. The costs, the cost of living, low paid insecure work, all these things are locking people in poverty, and it's that combined effect that's restricting their options and their opportunities. So that was another set of powerful metaphors that the research suggested we draw on. Next slide, please. So as I said, it's really crucial when we're talking about huge societal problems like poverty, which can feel daunting and overwhelming, that we talk about bold and you know, sufficiently large solutions that kind of match the severity of the problem we're talking about. It's crucial that we show that poverty is a problem that can be solved and avoid that fatalism. So just a couple of examples with the illustrations on the slides here. So on the left, the illustration really shows that it's helpful to explain that systems like the economy, equally it could be the benefits system or the housing market or the jobs market, these big unwieldy systems have actually been designed by people based on a set of decisions. They've not been designed by an act of God. We've designed these systems and we can redesign them. And again, that's to overcome that fatalism that it's all just too impossible. The illustration on the right situates benefits, which we know will always be a core part of solving poverty. Having that secure social security safety net will always play a critical role, and actually situating benefits as a key public service alongside the police, the NHS, etc., is a powerful way of shifting negative perceptions about the role of the benefit system, and actually can increase support for investment in the system. Next slide, please. So what impact is all of this work having? I mean, framing has absolutely given us a stronger voice. So we've been using the findings of this research for a number of years now. And we have countless press cuttings which show using our values and our metaphors really do kind of appear in media headlines. You know, when our experts are on TV and the radio arguing our case, it's really, it can be really great to see how powerful these tools and techniques can be for arguing for change. And the example here is a recent campaign we ran to keep a recent £20 uplift that was added to universal credit, which has been as we've called it, a lifeline during the COVID pandemic to support people through the period, but is also recognition of the fact that our benefit system has been hugely stripped back over the last 10 years and it is not adequate at all. But using that positive language of a lifeline and evoking that sense of something that's kind of pulling us out of those currents that can pull us under. We've worked across the sector with many charities, with political parties, and what we've seen is an echoing of that language across many different spaces, and that's actually given the campaign and the call to action a great clarity and a real cut through. And we've actually seen now that lifeline, which was due to be cut at the end of this month, has now been extended by another 6 months, so a considerable win there.
Can I ask you to wrap up fairly soon, Daisy?
Yeah, I'm on my last slide now. So final slide, please. Poverty and health. So yeah, Just to sort of sum up with a few final thoughts on the intersection between poverty and health. I mean, it's not an area that we've done specific research on in terms of framing, and I would absolutely sort of advise that you know, you do that if possible. But we do know from the kind of, we closely monitor the kind of media conversation, the social media conversation around poverty, and we know that health is a very strong theme that comes up a lot. And it's long been an area of interest for us to think about how we can use that way into the conversation about poverty. You know, of course, it doesn't need to be said that we know that health issues and poverty are inextricably linked, and that health conditions can be both the cause and consequence of poverty. So just very quickly, some of the ideas that I've just talked about that could be used when talking about that intersection. I think the currents metaphor, that idea that you're pulled under, could really help us explain how ill health and disability can pull people under, as well as make it harder to get out. Another metaphor that could be powerful to evoke is the constant stress and pressure, so quite a visual metaphor there, that people in poverty face, and the impact that has on their health and mental health. So I think in summary, I mean, it's obviously clear that the pandemic has shone a real spotlight on the injustice of health inequalities. So how can we harness this moment for change? And I think just very briefly, we need absolutely a very clear vision articulated by all, a simple and common understanding of the problem and the language. We need absolutely lived experience at the heart of those calls to action. So powerful stories, but also those voices demanding change and at the center of demanding change. We need trusted messengers, and the great thing about this space is that the health sector, doctors, nurses, etc., are extremely, we know from our research, extremely trusted messengers. So there's a real strength to your bow there. And finally, absolutely, we need that really strong values-based framing that talks about who we are as a society, and really seeks to trigger, as I've said, those core values of compassion and justice. Final slide, please. Yeah, and that's just a link there to our free toolkit at jrf.org.uk if you want to find out more. As this has just been an absolutely very slim skim across this work. There's a lot more depth to it.
Thank you so much, Daisy. This triggered so many comments and thoughts in the chat, and also up to the Q&A. So if you're on the panel, have a look at some questions there. There were some specific ones for you as well around language, around benefits, but you know, much to learn from, and be great to work with you as we move forward, particularly if we begin to shape up a public campaign. It'd be great to test some stuff with you and all the stuff that you have done so far. Let's build on all that learning. Right, it's my great pleasure to introduce Durka to you now. Professor Durka Dougall is senior fellow, something like that, at the King's Fund, and also a doctor of public health. And she works in various teams, various programs at the King's Fund, a lot with systems and with leaders in the system, trying to get to a place where health services take more responsibility for the health of the whole population and not just for the people who sit in the waiting room. I think that is a fair enough description, but she can describe it much better. And we've asked Durka to explain to us what she's learned from that work, because we're trying to keep this session really quite practical and to think through what's needed for us to work together, VCSE and statutory health system. So over to you, Durka.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, Helen and colleagues, for inviting me to speak today at this important conference. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you. So yes, I'm somebody who works at the King's Fund. I'm a mum of two, and I'm absolutely passionate about improving health and care for everyone. So really, really important agenda, and delighted to be here. What I'm going to try and do is summarise a great many slides in 7 minutes. So bear with me. I've put lots and lots of content in here, so that afterwards, hopefully, there'll be lots of links for you to be able to follow if you wanted to find out more. And of course, you can contact me afterwards as well. And I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone. But I'm just going to give you some headlines. So the topic that I've been asked to talk about is something I'm really passionate about. So what's needed for good partnership working between the statutory and the voluntary sector for tackling health inequality. So basically, I wanted to start by talking about why this is important to me. I mean, this could be something we talk about for a very long time, but it was just to say that as a child growing up, it was really apparent from early on the presence of an unequal system and the need to push and fight quite hard to work through that. As a doctor, it became very apparent that many of you face all of that and more on a daily basis. That map that is shown there in tiny print is actually the care map of any person with complex needs, and the need to actually juggle so many different services, and just how overwhelming that can feel, especially when we know that the poorest in society often find it the hardest to access care and often have to juggle even more. And over that time, I began to realize that there's a couple of things emerging as well as the presence of this, which is that we can do something about it if we put in the efforts in the right way, and most importantly, if we work together, because none of us can do this alone. So I've been delighted over the last 3 or 4 years to be working at the King's Fund, to be supporting systems across UK to actually think about how to work together for population health, which is improving health and tackling inequality. And the thing to say is that throughout this journey, the voluntary sector has been invaluable in so many ways through my own personal journey. And I think you play an invaluable part in terms of the future. I mean, currently, yes, but even more going forwards. So I think, like the journey I've just described, the health and care system is actually going on the same journey. From that focus on the individual to actually beginning to widen its focus to now thinking about working together and how do we work for population health, which I think is the key thing. And like Charlotte said, whether that is at an individual level for the person in front of you, whether it's for the community that you're looking after or part of, or whether it is for the wider population as a whole, the same principles apply. And COVID has clearly shown us the great need to focus on inequality. It is, some people have said, shone a spotlight in this, created a window of opportunity for working on this, and really also worsened the picture. So really call to us to focus on this. And hence why the timing of your conference, I think, is fantastic. And also, just to note that COVID has also shown some real opportunities. I've heard about charities finding that the bureaucracy had been cut. I've heard about systems working even closer together to respond. So there's something about learning and growing from this as well. So the insights from our work, I've got lots of pictures, and if anything triggers anything that people are interested in, do get in touch. But it was just basically to say that first and foremost, so just some headlines. The voluntary sector does great work already in this space. You are starting from a fantastic platform, and I think we'd be missing a trick if we did not recognise that. I've put 3 people who have just played a phenomenal impact in terms of my own work, and I've listed so many more. I'm guessing that many of you in the audience have contributed to work together, influence this. But you work with vulnerable communities, you've got key insights, you've got lived experience, you have reach and impact. I've seen it firsthand. You care passionately and you make a huge difference. So there's something about that must be recognised. But I think that in order for that to be recognised and built upon and grown to the extent that I think it needs to be to truly bring about population health, there are 5 things to go through, which I'll quickly head through, and 2 things to note. But the key thing here is to say that that requires a 2-way relationship. It cannot be that therefore the charity sector needs to do this or that the statutory organisations need to do this. It requires work from both. So the first thing is that there needs to be understanding about the sheer value and impact that you're already having and the potential that you have. So there's something about describing the work that you do and the assets that you bring, join forces and share this, help each other. And there's something about the system and statutory partners. If they truly want to deliver population health, it is going to require them to have an open mind and inquire and understand and have clarity about what you do. But this requires inclusion. So for you to be able to influence, voluntary sector partners have to be around the table. And whether that's at an individual care level, whether that's at a service level, an organisation level, at a partnership level, at a national level. So there's something that you can do to be present and take opportunities, grab them and lead this agenda. And there's something about partners when you're designing changes, invite charity organisations to be round that table from an early perspective to see what they can do. You need to be enabled to contribute. So I have worked with so many systems where they've said to us that actually charity sector partners are around the table, but when you speak to partners, they just don't feel heard. And it almost feels mechanistic, and that is not going to help population health. So what is really needed is for you to value your own contribution and to accept that that will take you sitting around the table at sometimes feeling uncomfortable, but speaking up and championing because you do bring so much. And for statutory partners to really do the work to see you as equal partners and to really help you to navigate a landscape, because some charities feel completely able to navigate the health and care landscape, and others we know have less experience of this or less resource to be able to spend the time doing this. So that support is needed. There's something about unity. So as a commissioner in the past, I've often found that the charity sector can be complex, and we've heard it from commissioning colleagues. But as a trustee of a charity, I also know just how important that unity and collective voice is. So have a few clear messages, iterate it over time, and system partners. That means that for you to be an equal partner, you may have to change your commissioning practice. The current models, actually, we find in the sense of performance management, contracts versus grants, system controls may not work. And actually what is required is a much more co-production, test and learn approach that enables creativity and solutions to local problems. The current landscape affords opportunities, not just in the health and care reforms in the white paper, but actually the COVID experiences. I mean, you've done fantastic work at National Voices, I know, in terms of setting the scene, but there's much more to be done. There's also things that we offer at the King's Fund, such as Healthy Communities Together, GSK Impact Awards. There are plenty of other opportunities. So grab the opportunities, grab them and grow. We know that it's not enough and that more is required, but hopefully together we will push this space and really be able to deliver a healthier future.
Durka, I need to ask you to wrap up fairly swiftly, if that's all right.
That's perfect. So two very quick points, one being on race and the other being on digital inclusion. They're my last two slides. So I've been asked to quickly talk about race. So the key thing here is twofold. Don't forget race. It's really important, but as we've heard already, remember that ethnic diversity is not one group, and actually each one is a highly individualized community. My mother is very proud at the age of 80, having been in this country for 40 years, that she is Sri Lankan. So on the census, she's very careful to put Asian other and specify that. And similarly for Black African, Black Caribbean groups. But do not reduce your understanding of inequality just to race. Many factors play a part. And the last slide is about digital health and inequalities. As we all work together to transform the future, please remember that there are two things to note. Don't allow developments, however well meant, to widen health inequalities by just us not thinking about it. And also see the plenty of opportunities that exist to narrow health inequalities by using the digital space to connect people, to create energy and momentum, and to really reach out to people we wouldn't have been able to reach out to as easily otherwise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Durka. You know, what a tour de force through such a wide range of issues. Loads of responses triggered in the chat, and I think also some questions in the Q&A for you to look at. Before we move on to our last speaker, who's Bola, I just want to briefly share with you what you have all voted on the Mentimeter. I haven't actually seen the result. Okay, so First one is directing debate towards social causes of ill health. So that's very much a plea to kind of do get upstream in as much as those categories do make sense. So let us talk about poverty, let us talk about racism, let us talk about housing and all those things. Really important challenge. I think this is territory that doesn't come natural to some health and care charities. And it's good to hear from all of you here today that you think we need to put up a camp in these territories and start inhabiting that space. Working with people with lived experiences and sharing stories authentically. Now that came up so strongly on the day that we talked about digital inclusion and exclusion. I remember sitting in these two workshops where that became so clear. And I think that's definitely something we can contribute that other players maybe are less well placed to do something about. Influencing political and system leaders, so that's us campaigning, diversifying our own organizations. And then the last one is providing inclusive services. I find that surprising because I always think, you know, that's one of the assets we bring as charities, that we are providing services, but maybe you are more aware of the fact that they are really quite small compared to the services the system provides and the structures that we operate within. So I'm hearing here quite a strong steer to go towards politics, to go towards arguments, and to not think we can resolve it all through the services we ourselves provide. More to reflect on and also to understand what people who said other actually talked about. Oh, and we've even got a bit of a change of top spot there. So really foregrounding lived experience. I think that is really interesting, and again, a challenge we need to take into everything we do now. We are now going to ask you with the second activity that we all ask you to engage with, to think about what you yourself are going to do. If we were in a physical space, we would ask you to write that on some post-it notes and stick them on some flip charts, and then we'd ask Sav, whilst we're talking, to sort these flip charts into themes. Now, she's going to try to do that virtually, so bear with us, let's see whether that works. But we would like everyone to make a commitment here today, thinking about the place where you work, thinking about the community you live in. What is it that you will take forward? And then if we add all these things together, hopefully it makes a tangible difference. So whilst you're thinking about that and make it practical, I'm going to ask our good friend Bola from NHS England to talk about what this agenda looks like from her perspective. She's fairly new in post, leading on the Inequalities agenda, right at the centre of the health and care system, and has, you know, thoughts to share around how to work with the VCSE and communities. Over to you, Bola.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's a privilege to be called your friend and the friend of the charity. That means a lot, and I do see it that way too. So thank you so much for the invitation once again to join you today. And it's a very important conversation that we're having. I just want to share, I'll see if I can share my screen, and apologies if you've heard this before, but actually maybe I shouldn't apologize, because it's really important that we continue to hold this issue in front of our eyes. It means that we won't forget, and it means that we will continue to strengthen our resolve. And so I arrive at this, not just in my role as Health Inequalities Director at NHS England and Improvement, but also as a GP working at the front line, seeing people in their community and how, you know, they're impacted by inequalities in their wider lives that then translate into their clinical needs. So for me, this is not simply a policy conversation. This is a conversation about real people and real lives. And I come at this also as a member of a community. So I belong to a faith group, which is a very tiny faith group in a very, very deprived community in South Yorkshire. And I see how people experience their lives as a result of, you know, poverty and the impact that it has on them and the things that it causes them to turn to, which then impact on their health and their well-being. So for me, this is very much a lived experience of people. And that is the perspective that I'm coming from today. And so in terms of the vision that we've been setting out about the work that we're trying to do in relation to health inequality, we're talking about three key things. We're talking about access, experience, and outcomes. Because you see, once people cross the threshold in terms of access, it also does matter their experience once they cross the threshold. Because you see, your experience determines your outcomes to a significant extent, and it also impacts on your future health-seeking behavior. And so to my mind, it's important that we do talk about it across these three domains as we work together with you as our voluntary sector partners to deliver that exceptional quality care. We need to think about it in terms of equitable access, in terms of people having an excellent experience and their outcomes being as optimal as we can make it. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell very much on a lot of these slides because I really want to get very quickly to the role of the voluntary sector. But I think it's important to remind ourselves of the communities we're talking about when we talk about health inequalities. And the pandemic, to be honest, has already told us who those communities are. You don't need me to tell you, but just to remind us, it's people from the ethnic minority communities. It's those in the most deprived areas of our communities. It's what we describe as the inclusion health groups. So your homeless traveler communities, people with learning disability, severe mental illness, and of course the protected characteristics. These are the communities we're talking about. And if I go on to the slide that talks about just the next one, and the next one, please. And the next one after that one, and the next one. I'm just trying to get very quickly. I'm mindful of your time. Next one, please. Thank you. So I think in discussing our roles, I want to first talk about the role of the NHS. It's true that we've said in the long-term plan that we can't treat our way out of health inequalities. It is also true that the NHS has a very powerful and important contribution to make. And I describe that across three domains. And actually, the more I've thought about it, there are four domains. The first is the role of the NHS as a commissioner and provider of services and its ability to influence the access, experience, and outcomes question through its contracting levers. There is also that role of the NHS, especially as we go forward into integrated care systems. The ability of the NHS to work in collaboration with organizations such as yourselves, with local authority partners, with community actions organizations on the ground, and the communities themselves. So there is the role of the NHS as an important ICS partner. There is its role as an anchor institution. So we know that for a lot of, particularly the youth, with what's happened with the pandemic and the scarcity of employment, we know that the NHS has a very powerful role to play in offering volunteering opportunities for people to pick up skills that then set them up for substantive employment, and indeed the opportunity to offer employment to some people as they come forward. So I think that role of the NHS as an anchor institution is an important one. And the role of the NHS as an employer. Don't forget that the people employed by the NHS are a section of our communities, and they also experience health inequalities. And that's what I mean by its four things. So then, springing board from that to the role of the voluntary sector, I think you have a very powerful advocacy role. You know, and particularly as national voices, not focusing specifically on any subject area. I think that gives you a tremendous opportunity to really hold the mirror up to us, you know, in relation to different communities that will be experiencing health inequalities in different ways across the communities that I was just talking about just now. So I think that advocacy role is one that you should hold and pride in, because there is a risk that it's not named, and because it's not named, it's not recognized. And that's why I've deliberately put it on there. There is also the insight that you provide us. So Charlotte and I have been in email exchange over a particular issue recently, and that's the sort of thing I mean about insight. So I mean insight both in terms of, the formal insight pieces of work that you do as the voluntary sector, but also insight because of the reach that you have into the community that I don't necessarily have even as a GP, and that my frontline colleagues don't necessarily have. There is a relationship that the communities have with the voluntary sector that is different to the relationship that they have with the institutions. It's really important to recognize your influence in that way. There are barriers you can cross a lot more easily. There are conversations people will have with you because you're the voluntary sector that they won't necessarily have even with me, with the best will in the world. And so there is an insight that you have because of those interactions that will really help us to make sure that we're focusing our efforts and our energies in the right place. Because one thing I often say is not every change is an improvement. And it's very easy to do a lot of activity. Activity doesn't necessarily translate into progress. And I think the way you make sure that activity translates to improvement and progress is by having actionable insight. And I think that the voluntary sector provides us with actionable insight that stops us from activity as an end in itself. I think there's also something about intervention. So you do intervene in very powerful ways in people's lives. So it's not all about telling everybody else what to do. I really stand in awe of the voluntary sector in terms of the tangible things that you actually do, to support people and communities and families. And we've seen that in droves during this COVID pandemic response, whether that is in the support of people shielding, and the various services that they've had, whether it's the role of the voluntary sector in actually standing up the biggest volunteer service that we've ever had, in our nation history. And so that's what I mean by intervention, including supporting people in communities that are anxious about the COVID vaccine, for example. I've seen a lot of voluntary sector organizations really reaching into communities, giving people confidence, respectfully listening to their concerns, creating avenues and forums for those concerns to be addressed. And that is what I mean by, intervention being another really important contribution that the voluntary sector makes. And there's something about primary prevention. I think before people end up in very difficult and challenging circumstances, there is something about primary prevention in spotting the risk for that happening. And again, I see the voluntary sector through its work in providing people with purpose and connection. You actually play a significant role in stopping that trajectory whereby people spiral into lots of difficulty, whether it's in terms of addiction or gambling or other social issues that then translate into significant clinical and family problems. So I think there is a very important role that the voluntary sector plays in primary prevention through providing people with purpose and connection for their lives. And I will always mention Shan Lockwood when I talk about this, from Community Catalyst. I remember a powerful conversation I had with her where she said, Bola, purpose and connection enable people to live their best lives. And I think that is such an incredible statement. And it really describes what the voluntary sector brings to the table in that primary prevention space. So I really hope that by setting out our contributions in this way, we can see points of intersection where we can work together to really start to make meaningful progress. And you notice I keep saying that meaningful progress and impact, not just activity as an end in itself. And I really look forward to us working together on this agenda. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Bola. Such a so great to hear that, and I see that in the chat that people are really grateful for you to set it out so clearly and with such a high degree of appreciation of the various contributions we make, and that the services we bring are really only a part of the package of activity. when you talk about purpose and connection, it reminds me of the sort of pyramid of need we used to talk about, where we said, you know, people need like food and shelter to start with, and only at the very end do we talk about self-realization and connection. And really, I think we got that the wrong way around. I think there's an argument to be made that people need to actually feel like they can make a contribution and that there is a purpose to their lives, so that they can then address some of the material circumstances of their life. Right, we've got so many questions in the Q&A and we won't get around to all of them. I'll ask a first round of questions, one each for each of the panelists, so that we get through many of them rather than handing the same question around to all panelists. My first one is the one that I went with the ones that got a lot of votes from you on the Q&A functionality. It's about, can we think of a quick win? Like, you know, given what you all think we should get into the campaigning space and we should argue with decision makers, what do you think a quick win might be that we could fall behind, something actually achievable? And I'm going to ask that question of Durka to start with. You know, understanding the political space and understanding the statutory health service space, what do you think, which fruit is ripe for picking for us as a charity coalition to argue for?
So I think from a personal perspective, what I would like to see happen is the insights that you bring being injected into systems development. So I've seen the most powerful impacts being where charities have just literally come and spoken to groups of leaders. So James from Sign Health spoke to 25 health and care leaders, and they left that session saying, our eyes have been opened. We did not understand that this was the first-hand experience of what you're going through as a charity leader, as an individual, and it's happened across different charities across the country. So there's something really powerful about that. But for National Voices and the collaboration, I would say focus on even more COVID, growing forwards from COVID, from the work that you've already done. You've created a massive platform, and build on that to now start influencing the policies that are emerging, particularly public health, which will be coming later this week, and the white paper.
Okay, thank you. If we have time, I might ask the other speakers as well for their take on a quick, actually very quickly, Daisy, what do you think is a winnable ask right now from your perspective as an organisation that has thought long and hard about successful campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps not a quick one, but a really important one, as I said, is really about the sector aligning behind a shared narrative. You know, I think given the fact that there seems to be a really high demand for, you know, an upstream approach to be talking about the drivers of health inequality, rather than a sort of sticking plaster fixing problems at the service delivery end. I mean, I'm really, really heartened to see such enthusiasm for that, as well as for lived experience to be at the heart of that. That's really exciting to hear. So I think if the sector can, you know, it will be hard won. There are many, many cooks, but if they can come together and agree a sort of shared narrative about what the problem is and what the solutions need to be, that would be a major step forward. I think, and then perhaps a quick win in terms of sort of taking that out into the world and starting to influence. Just an idea off the top of my head, and I obviously work very much in the kind of political influencing space, but a good way to start to, you know, once you have a shared narrative and vision, a good way to start to kind of infiltrate that within the political sphere is potentially to try and call for a select committee inquiry, perhaps a joint select committee inquiry between different select committees. You know, that's the problem with poverty and health inequalities, is I think it gets siloed off perhaps into the health department when we actually know it's a huge intersectional problem. So can we get different committees to come together to look at this problem and take that cross-departmental approach, which is often what's really, really missing when it comes to tackling these big multifaceted problems in society. So calling for an inquiry, which I think you would have a decent chance of securing, could be a really good way of starting to leverage that debate and get you know, powerful actors within Parliament really putting their head to the grindstone on this.
Excellent idea. Definitely scribble that one away.
Maybe not quick though, yeah. Don't hold me to that.
Absolutely, we need to do some more thinking. Another question that's come up that got a lot of vote from participants here today is around social care. Now, we haven't spoken about that so much here, and it's one of those things that often gets not spoken about so much, even though it's obviously massively important to people's resilience and people's ability to weather storms such as a pandemic. Marsha, I know that you've got strong views on social care, also based on your own experiences. What do you think is the role of social care in supporting people to adapt or to stay afloat, to use this this metaphor that Daisy introduced, you know, to kind of weather the storm of pandemics, inequalities, whatever it is? Marsha, over to you on social care.
Thank you. So I have domiciliary care in the morning and at night to help me with my personal hygiene, take my medication, and sometimes they force me to eat because I've not really got a really good relationship with food, but they're there, they look after me, and they are amazing. I call them my fairy godmothers, but they're not an actual normal domiciliary care agency because I'd been let down by them in the past. So I've got a temporarily in-house service from the city council, and I think we need to really, going forward, take into account social care, and this is where it's fallen down. People have their mental health and their physical health needs taken into account, because my lived experience is that doesn't happen, and I've been failed over and over again. I've also ran up debt of over £2,500 in debt because I fell behind on that. And that is another way of, in my eyes, it's poverty. I've ran up and I'm stuck in that cycle. So does that sort of make sense? So I think that going forward, someone's physical and mental health need to be taken into account, especially with what's happened during COVID and the long COVID that's going to, you know, the long-term effects and impact of people. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Marsha. Bola, some questions for you. I don't know whether you've got some thoughts on social care and what the NHS and NHS leaders can do to finally make some progress on these rather protracted agendas. But also quite a few questions coming up from various people about, you know, really being appreciative of how you frame the contribution the sector makes, but also saying, look, we're all on our knees financially, we're all needing investment, that we are, you know, so fragile now in terms of our ability to community fundraise, we've overextended. How can we land arguments, maybe with colleagues of yours and the government, around the need to invest in VCSE and to invest sustainably in community infrastructure? So maybe those two thoughts around the need to move away from very piecemeal and unsustainable ways of supporting the VCSE.
Thank you, Charlotte. Really important points and a really good question. It actually links to your first question about quick wins, albeit in a more sustainable way. So the thoughts that have occurred to me are, so we're doing a lot of work in terms of making sure that there are link workers. I think the sector could do a really good job of articulating the question of what do you link people to? Because a lot of the work that the voluntary sector does in the community are the community contributions that people can be linked to. So I can be a link worker with the best will in the world, working incredibly hard, but if the community services aren't there for me to be able to link people to, you can see how there will be a break in that transmission, and therefore what we're seeking to achieve will be curtailed. And I think framing the conversation in that way, which is that investment in the voluntary sector really provides that place of connection to support the investment that we're making elsewhere in terms of having link workers. I think that's one thing. I think there's also something around framing this as the legacy from the COVID pandemic. I think we've all seen the extraordinary response to the pandemic itself, to the vaccination program. But there's something about what is the legacy beyond this point. And I think if the voluntary sector can begin to frame and position itself as a very important part of that legacy conversation beyond this point. And I know, whoever you talk to, I can't see that anybody would be arguing that we shouldn't be building on the learning, the connections, the partnerships, the networks, so many things that have been done through this pandemic. I can't see anyone arguing that there shouldn't be a legacy from all of that. And I think, going back to that sense of shared purpose, maybe that is the shared purpose about the voluntary sector being a very powerful ally and contributor to the legacy of tackling health inequalities beyond the pandemic phase. I think that would be really important. And finally, I think it's also important to think about it from a strengths-based approach. The more we couch this conversation in enabling people, the more we're likely to gain traction, so that we become more of a coral reef where people are able to come and perch for a while whilst they find their feet and are strengthened to float away and be able to be independent if possible. I think those are the things that we need to, those are the three anchor thoughts that come to my mind around, the legacy conversation, the coral reef, the strengths-based approach, and coming, as my colleague was saying earlier on, around coalescing a common shared narrative around that, and the fact that the social, that the voluntary sector really is that anchor point that people can be linked into by the various investments that we've made into link workers. Perhaps those four things may be useful to consider as a way of framing it. And it could be a quick win as well. There will be things that we can do pretty straight away in that kind of framing, as well as having the conversation in influencing policy.
Thank you so much, Bola. Right, I'm going to hand over to Savannah now, who I think has been beavering away in the background looking at all your virtual post-it notes about trying to understand what are the sort of clusters of ideas you have of things that you all on this call and your colleagues and your organisations might take forward. Over to you, Savannah.
Yeah, so the question was, what do you pledge to do to tackle health inequity? So bear with me because there's a lot of responses, but I've tried to group them into themes. And it's important to note, I think, that the people answering these questions, the people today is such a mix. We've got experts by experiences, clinicians, charities, community action groups, think tank system leaders. So lots of different people pledging different types of things. So I've split it into 4 themes of what people have been pledging. So people have been pledging things about language, about collaboration, about how best they're going to go about their influencing, and some a lot of pledges around self-assessment as well. So the first one, language, a lot of people have talked about how they want to co-produce common narratives and integrate these common narratives into every area of their work and make sure that their language is accessible and transparent language about what the problems are and the challenges we face. And raise awareness using this accessible language and have those difficult conversations and also positive conversations. So, for example, about poverty, that's something we can solve and we need to solve. And a lot of people have talking about specific recommendations and specific asks that we can have, such as Marmot's recommendations or asking for an inquiry or a living income. So that's language. So secondly, collaboration. A lot of people have pledged having solidarity with each other's campaigns. So, for example, the great work that Joseph Rowntree Foundation are doing, or the Health Foundation, or National Voices, or whoever, and having solidarity with what each of us are doing and with what community action groups are already doing, and solidarity with what community health champions are doing as well, and engaging experts by experience or easily ignored communities the whole way. So collaboration is second. Third, influencing the NHS or government, a lot of people have pledged to use stories and to keep patient voice at the centre the whole time, and use the insights from people with experience. Think always in these meetings, in these conversations, about the point of view of the most deprived communities. And one person said, in every community, there's something that does work. So to think about that and take that and share it in all these meetings. So that is influencing. And the fourth one is self-assessment. And I think it's just important to really briefly mention that National Voices are doing a huge amount of this at the moment. And we're pledging self-assessment, I think, in many areas as well. But yeah, self-assessment about the language we're using, about the recruitment people are doing, about noticing casual inequalities and spotlighting them in all these discussions, a lot of people said taking time to listen, taking time to learn. And a lot of people pledged helping individuals themselves, prioritizing empathy and kindness, which I think was really, really important. So yeah, a lot about language, about collaboration, about keeping experts by experience and the insights of people with experience at the center when influencing and using stories, and continually self-assessing ourselves. But we will share the full, I think we'll have it on our website or something, everyone's pledges, but those are just some themes I picked up. Charlotte, back to you.
Wow, thank you, Sav. I mean, with a team like this, you know, what could possibly go wrong? Amazing work, really, really interesting and so well presented. Lots again there to mull over. Now, Helen is going to wrap us up at the end of this webinar this morning and also at the end of the overall conference. Before I hand over to her, I just want to give everyone on the panel literally 30 seconds to say what they will do. What are you taking away to your place of work, to your colleagues, to your community, and also recognizing that some of us have broader shoulders than others. So just I'll start so that you have 30 seconds to think. We will set up a coalition for health fairness, health justice. We need to still settle on the language. And we will co-produce with all of you who want to a set of priorities and a set of campaign asks and a set of influencing ambitions, listening to everything you're going to say. So we're going to write to you about all of this, watch this space, and please do lean in. Right, I'm now going to hand over to Daisy and then Durka.
Thanks, Charlotte. So I guess this is on my behalf. I can't make a promise on behalf of JRF, but I am really, really keen that JRF get involved and support you guys in developing up your shared narrative. And also, you know, we do a lot of work at JRF around engaging lived experience, and it's not just about stories, although that is a hugely important part. It's actually about that kind of co-production of solutions and influencing, and that's a journey that we're on. But I'd be really keen that we share our nascent learnings on how to do that work well, and to support as well with questions of strategy and communications, which is obviously kind of more our bread and butter work at JRF. So I'd love for us to support you. I mean, certainly I can support with some of my time, but we may be able to go further in thinking about what resources we can support with, because I know, as I said, that intersection of poverty and health is a really, really rich seam into the conversation about poverty that I think we'd be really keen to explore.
Wonderful, thank you, Daisy. Very generous of her. Durka.
Thank you. And again, on behalf of me, so there's something about taking the 4 themes that Savannah has outlined and actually re-looking at the work that I influence in those lenses, so language, collaboration, insights, and self-assessment. There's something really powerful about the comments that you've put in chat. And it looks like, if I were to sum it up, it's the allyship role that the statutory partners need to take. So it's not good enough just encouraging people to live the principles of allyship as individuals. Actually, as system partners, we need to live that too, with the voluntary sector, with public health, with social care. We're passionate about that, but you're encouraging us to work more in that space. I've heard it loud and clear, thank you. And the last thing is to pledge my support, so for the collaboration that you form, to keep working with you, to learn from you, and to keep working together to address inequity and inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Durka. Right, Marsha and then Bola, your 30 seconds. Is there something that you will take away and try to progress? Marsha, you first.
I'd like to support you with any of your stigma campaigns, and implore you to actually look at people with severe enduring mental health and physical health. So I'm definitely behind you for anything like that.
Thank you so much. Again, another really generous offer. Bola.
Thank you, Charlotte. So I think the stories have come out very strongly as a very important tool for the work we're doing. And I pledge to ensure that my strategic meetings, which often have a lot of policy influencers and makers around the table, will begin with either a patient story or a staff story, so that the policy conversations we go on to have are grounded in the reality of people's lives. So that's my first pledge about how we're going to use stories going forward. And I also promise my personal contribution and collaboration with you on this journey, particularly around those strengths-based approaches, because I think that they are the way that we're going to achieve sustainability. I have seen it play out in the lives of my patients when we have turned the lens from what they can't do to the things that they can do, and how we're going to support them to be able to do those things. And so I am committing to working with you and supporting you as you develop your strengths-based approaches. And the final commitment that I'm making is to continue to explore ways that we can actually concretely support you in terms of specific interventions that you may want to take forward, and to bring the resources at our disposal in different forms to that endeavor. Those are my 3 pledges to you.
Wow, 3. And there's a lot of appreciation for what you've just said in the chat, I can tell. Right, Helen, over to you. What a month it's been, and thank you for wrapping us up, and thank you for everyone.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you to everybody. As Charlotte says, we will be in touch with more details about the network and how we want to shape that based on the conversation today and over the last few weeks. So do stay in touch on that. If any of you participating are in organisations who are not members of National Voices and you want to get involved and join us, we'd be really happy to welcome you. There are details on our website about how you can get in touch and sign up to be a member or to sign up to our newsletter. And just to say that if you're a small charity and working in health inequalities, membership is free. Obviously, bigger charities, we ask to contribute to our work as well. But really, I just want to conclude with saying an enormous thank you to everybody who's made the last few weeks possible. Our partners at PPL, particularly Laura and Laura, our partners at the Health Foundation, the whole team at National Voices. And I don't know if people realise how tiny a team it is and how much it punches above its weight. So I've just thought I would say thank you to everybody personally. We've got Savannah that you've heard today, Ella, Jess, Rebecca, Charles, Rosie, Rachel, Kasha, Jen, and obviously Charlotte herself. That's the team that makes all of this happen. And it's, as Charlotte said earlier, a fantastic team to work with. I want to thank all the speakers over the last few weeks. We've had speakers from within National Voices, we've had guests from outside, we've had our members running workshops, and that's made the event the inclusive and participative and rich set of sessions that we've had. I think my final message is to say that, individually and collectively, we do have the power to make change happen. We've all made some pledges today that we can take away and act on over the next year, and we will. And so I don't want to worry the team too much, but one thought I had in the last few minutes was that perhaps next year we can come back together and we can talk about what's happened since, the things that we've made happen, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what we want to continue to do to address the challenges that we've heard. And I think really importantly, as we've heard today, to make the best of the assets that we've got, that everybody in our communities brings the power of themselves, the power of the assets they bring, and we can put that together and we can reduce the inequalities in our society and we can make things better. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you over the course of the coming year and perhaps again in a year's time. Thank you. Goodbye.